In February 1973, something unexpected happened. Nick Drake picked up the phone and called John Wood. He said he was ready to record again, ready to make a fourth album. For everyone who knew him, who had watched him disappear into silence for 2 years, this was the call they had stopped expecting. What followed were the last recordings Nick Drake ever made in a professional studio, and they are unlike anything he had recorded before. To understand what these sessions meant, you have to understand where Nick Drake had been. After Pink Moon in 1972, he had essentially stopped recording, stopped performing, stopped leaving his parents' house in Tamworth for weeks at a time. Joe Boyd had moved to Los Angeles. Island Records had quietly stopped his weekly retainer. The music press had moved on to other things, and Nick Drake had retreated so completely that even his closest friends had started to lose the thread of him. Then in February 1973, without warning, without explanation, he called Sound Techniques. John Wood, the engineer who had recorded every note of every Nick Drake album, answered. Joe Boyd flew back from Los Angeles, and for the first time in over a year, Nick Drake walked back into a recording studio. What Boyd found was not the Nick Drake he remembered. This Nick was angry. In his 2006 memoir, Boyd described being taken aback. Nick told him directly, "You told me I was a genius. Others agreed. So why wasn't he famous? Why wasn't he rich? Why had none of it worked?" Boyd wrote that this rage must have been festering for years beneath that famously inexpressive exterior, and now finally it had found its way to the surface. This is important, because the songs Nick recorded in these sessions carry that anger. They are darker than Pink Moon, more direct, less resigned. Pink Moon sounds like someone who has made peace with disappearing. These songs sound like someone who hasn't. There is a difference between melancholy and rage. And for the first time in his recorded work, Nick Drake was raging. The recording process itself had changed. On previous albums, Nick had recorded guitar and vocal together, live in one take, the way he preferred. His voice and his guitar were inseparable, two parts of the same breath. By 1973 and 1974, Boyd and Wood noticed something different. Nick's voice and guitar were no longer arriving at the same time. He needed to record them separately. Guitar first, then voice overdubbed on top. Nobody said this directly. Nobody needed to. It was simply how it had to be done now. And yet, John Wood was clear about something important. Nick was not depressed during these sessions. He was focused, intentional, present in a way he hadn't been for years. His mother Molly later said that these sessions were the first time in years she had seen her son happy, not recovered, not fixed, but genuinely, briefly present. The studio had always been the one place where Nick Drake made sense to himself. And for these few days in 1973, and again in July 1974, it still was. 4 songs were recorded across the 2 sessions. They sat in a vault for 5 years. In 1979, Island Records released a box set called Fruit Tree, the complete Nick Drake catalog. Tucked inside was a 4th record called Time of No Reply. It contained those 4 songs. The world heard them for the first time, 5 years after Nick Drake had recorded them, and 5 years after his death. In 2004, a 5th song from the sessions was officially released. It was called Toe the Line. It had been sitting in the archive for 30 years. Those who heard them understood immediately. These were not unfinished sketches. These were not the sounds of someone falling apart. They were fully formed songs, precise, deliberate, complete. Boyd had been right. They were extraordinary, dark and angry in a way Nick had never been before, but extraordinary. The professional sessions ended in July 1974, but Nick Drake did not stop recording. At Farley's, his parents' house in Tamworth, he had set up a small reel-to-reel tape machine in his bedroom, and in the months between July and November 1974, he continued to work, quietly, alone, without a studio or an engineer or a producer. On the evening of November 24th, 1974, the night before he died, Nick Drake was in his room recording new song ideas onto that home tape machine. Nobody knows exactly what he recorded that night. The tapes from that period exist but have never been fully released. What is known is that he was working, still making music on the last night of his life. His mother came in to say goodnight. She said later that he seemed calm, focused, more like himself than he had been in a long time. In the early hours of November 25th, Nick Drake died. He was 26 years old. The tape machine in his room was still there. The songs on it were still there. Whatever he had been building that final evening, it was still there, unfinished, unheard, gone. The 4 released songs from the final sessions are not a footnote to Nick Drake's story. They are its final statement, not the resignation of Pink Moon, not the hope of 5 Leaves Left, something harder and more honest than either. The sound of someone who understood exactly what had been taken from him and was angry about it for the first time. He never got to finish what he was making. He never got to find out if this time, this album, these songs, this anger would have been the one that finally broke through. We will never know either, but the music is there. 5 songs in a vault for years, then released into a world that was finally ready to hear them, just like everything else Nick Drake ever made. Always late, always worth it. The full story of Nick Drake continues on our YouTube channel, link in bio.